Hello there, I'm Henry Keane, and this is News Pulse, the beating heart of the news from Ukraine and for the world. The United States believes Russia needs to take action to bring the war to an end. US President Donald J. Trump made this statement on the social media platform Truth Social, once again emphasizing the senselessness of a war that claims thousands of lives every week. Notably, this statement comes in the wake of a meeting between Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and Russian dictator Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg on April 11th. More on the tools the US could use to influence the Kremlin and push for peace in our next report.
Russia is attempting to strengthen its hand in talks with the United States, seeking to engage from the most advantageous position possible. Putin is signaling to the Americans, Ukrainians, and Europeans that he is not willing to make concessions. Talks between Putin and U.S. Special Presidential Envoy Steve Witkoff lasted 5 hours in St. Petersburg. According to the Kremlin, the meeting focused on issues related to the so-called Ukrainian settlement. During a press conference, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stated that Donald Trump is dissatisfied with the lack of progress toward a ceasefire in Ukraine.
I think the president has been quite clear that he's been continually frustrated with both sides of this conflict, and he wants to see this fighting end. He wants the war to end. We believe we have leverage in negotiating a deal, a peace deal, and we're going to use that leverage, and the president is determined to see this through.
Witkoff had previously visited Moscow on March 13th, also meeting with Putin to discuss, among other things, a proposed 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine, an agreement Russia violated on the very first day. According to Ukraine's foreign ministry, during the supposed truce, Russia launched nearly 70 missiles and over 2,200 Shahed drones at Ukrainian territory.
We're talking about 70 missiles, ballistic, cruise, hypersonic, and guided aerial bombs, which Russia is using to blanket the entire front line and nearby cities, including cities with millions of people. And of course, Shaheds are hitting large city centers and residential neighborhoods every night. This clearly shows that Russia has no intention of honoring any agreements.
The U.S. has a strategy aimed at pressuring Russia into peace, primarily through tough sanctions and military support for Ukraine. Podolyak is convinced that sooner or later, Washington will be forced to act on this strategy, given that Russia continues to ignore diplomatic agreements. Without external pressure, Russia will not stop.
I believe they will use these tools. They are already revealing their strategy. We may like it or not. Yes, Russia is still attacking civilians, but the message is, we're ready to talk if you stop. Since Russia doesn't stop, other steps are needed. I believe the US will ultimately have to take those steps.
Donald Trump has reportedly given Russia a deadline to reach a ceasefire by the end of April. If not, the U.S. will impose sanctions on Russia's shadow fleet. Trump may formally request that Congress authorize such measures, according to Axios.
Why? Because both sides have acknowledged that quick breakthroughs in resolving the Ukraine issue are unlikely. That's why they've left the Ukrainian case floating. Depending on the situation, conditions, outcomes of other negotiations, and overlapping interests, they've decided not to let their own relationship hinge entirely on the so-called Ukraine issue and instead are choosing to develop it dynamically.
Russia remains the only obstacle to peace and the sole source of war, says Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha. He insists that international partners shouldn't wait another month to step up pressure on Moscow. On March 11th in Jeddah, Ukraine agreed to a ceasefire proposal from the United States. Russia, on the other hand, responded with ultimatums and demands. Had Moscow respected the agreement, there could already be steps in place toward a truce and rebuilding trust, paving the way for the just peace that the US, Europe, and other allies are striving for.
Russia refused to agree, instead putting forward conditions and demands. At the same time, Russia continued to escalate its terror against civilians. This is typical of Russia, lying, manipulating, and continuing terror. Andriy Sybiha, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, on social network X.
Ukraine's top priority remains security guarantees. According to Bloomberg, the UK and France are expected to present Donald Trump with a comprehensive plan for post-war peacekeeping forces in Ukraine in the coming weeks. Both governments hope this will convince the US president to commit to providing Kyiv with long-term security guarantees. Reported by Victoria Smirnova, UATV News.
By 2025, Ukraine is expected to have the capacity to produce 35 billion worth of weapons annually. This was confirmed by Ukraine's Minister of Strategic Industries, Herman Smetanin, during a briefing held in honor of Gunsmith Day. Presidential advisor Alexander Kamyshin also noted that between 30 and 40% of the weaponry used by the Ukrainian armed forces is domestically produced. Stay tuned for a closer look at Ukraine's growing defense industry.
More than 2 million FPV drones, nearly 2.5 million rounds of ammunition, and 324 new military products. These are the achievements of Ukraine's defense industry over the past year, according to the Ministry of Strategic Industries. Among the most significant developments are drone missiles. It was previously reported that these have a range of up to 700 kilometers, covering a strike radius that includes 20 Russian airfields. In 2024 alone, Ukraine developed 4 models of such missiles.
We've introduced an entirely new class of missiles, drone missiles, Palynicя, Peklo, Ruta and Bars. In 2023, we had only one cruise missile, the legendary Neptune, which struck the cruiser Moskva. But in 2024, thanks to new developments, we increased domestic missile production 8-fold.
Production of existing weaponry has also ramped up. Compared to 2023, the number of munitions produced has nearly doubled. The number of electronic warfare systems increased 340 times, and production of self-propelled artillery units tripled. According to Herman Smetanin, in 2024, Ukraine focused on the robotization of its army. The country manufactured 22 times more deep-strike drones and 15 times more ground-based robotic systems than it did the year before last.
This will be one of the game changers this year. We must ensure our army is robotized and autonomous, so that on the most dangerous parts of the front, where our military faces the highest risks, we can replace them as much as possible with robotic systems.
Private industry is also joining the robotization effort. The government platform Brave One has funded 126 private initiatives related to FPV drones, 123 for robotic ground systems, and 22 for EW systems, according to Brave One director Natalia Kushnerska. She says that private companies enable Ukraine to innovate in defense tech and quickly implement these solutions on the battlefield. The current focus is on localizing production inside Ukraine and developing domestic equivalents of Western weapons.
This year, we plan to produce more of our own missiles. Priorities also include lasers, drone swarms, autonomous strike systems, surface and underwater drones, countermeasures against Shaheds and guided bombs, continued development of a Ukrainian analog to the Mavic drone, and of course, guided munitions remain a top priority.
The defense industry is a key pillar of Ukraine's economy. According to Herman Smetanin, in 2024, Ukraine's GDP grew by almost 4%, and a third of that growth came from the defense sector. Last year, the Ukrainian defense industry had the capacity to produce $20 billion worth of military goods, but in practice only $9 billion was realized. To attract funding, Ukraine is bringing in foreign investors. Thanks to them, in 2024, Kyiv produced over $500 million worth of weaponry and plans to triple that figure in 2025. After the war, Ukraine also intends to establish a strong arms export sector.
As we integrate into the EU and NATO, we understand that we need to contribute to strengthening the defense capabilities of both. Ukraine's defense sector specializes in products that the Western world is often reluctant to manufacture. Our focus is on affordable, effective solutions that don't compete with the European systems but rather complement them.
Earlier, Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal stated that Ukraine aims to supply over half of its military needs with domestically produced weapons. According to Kamyshin, currently 30–40% of the weapons used by the armed forces of Ukraine are made in Ukraine. By 2025, Ukraine plans to increase the capabilities of its defense industry by 1.5 times. Reported by Andriy Dmytrenko, UATV News.
The Hungarian government is launching a so-called national consultation, whatever that means, by sending out ballots to its citizens asking for their opinion on Ukraine's potential membership in the European Union. Well, this was announced by Gergely Gilias, the chief of staff of Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. Gilias emphasized that Hungary officially opposes Ukraine's integration into the EU. Can the European Union counter Hungary's potential veto? We explore that in Question Next.
There are fewer than 80 days left before Poland's presidency of the EU Council ends. Warsaw had planned to open the first cluster of accession negotiations for Ukraine before that deadline, but the chances of that scenario have significantly diminished, according to Adam Swapka, Poland's Minister for EU Affairs. He stated that Hungary continues to block the start of Ukraine's EU membership talks. The official reason cited by Budapest is the alleged unresolved status of the Hungarian ethnic minority in Ukraine's Zakarpattia region. Hungary will not allow Brussels to force it to support Ukraine's accession to the EU, Prime Minister Viktor Orbán declared. In his view, Hungary must oppose Ukraine's integration, claiming it poses financial, agricultural, and pension-related risks to the country.
It is our firm belief, mine personally as well, that Ukraine's accession would devastate Hungary. There are Hungarian parties that envision Hungary dissolving into a large European state, where decisions made by Brussels and imperial headquarters must be implemented in Hungary. We will not let Brussels force us into accepting Ukraine's EU membership. This is a huge issue with widespread implications for our security, economy and agriculture. We will ask the Hungarian people and act as they decide. Viktor Orbán, Prime Minister of Hungary, on a social network X.
Orbán reiterated that he plans to hold a public consultation on whether Hungarians support Ukraine joining the EU, with policy decisions to follow the outcome. Meanwhile, Hungary also held a poll on support for Orbán himself as prime minister. The results suggest Hungarians would now prefer opposition politician Peter Magyar in the top role.
Peter Magyar enjoys the support of 39% of respondents, significantly ahead of Ákos Hatházi and Viktor Orbán, who rank second and third. When asked who they would prefer as prime minister, 33% chose the incumbent Orbán, while 37% favored Magyar, leader of the Tisza party. 30% were undecided or unwilling to choose. From the results of the 21 research Center survey on the think tank's website.
Orbán's declining popularity is driven not only by Hungary's economic problems and democratic backsliding, but also by increasingly strained relations with Brussels. The Hungarian leader regularly blocks EU initiatives, often demanding concessions in exchange for his support.
Hungary, in the person of Viktor Orbán, has long been a major obstacle to EU functionality. He blocks much more than just foreign policy. He obstructs financial and internal decisions too. Most notably, he consistently tries to align himself with both dictator Putin and the new US President Trump.
Recall that during an extraordinary European Council meeting on March 6th, Orbán refused to sign the joint EU communiqué on continued support for Ukraine. As a result, the Ukraine-related points had to be split into a separate document, signed by 26 out of 27 EU leaders.
There are mechanisms and tricks being used that somewhat undermine the credibility of the process. These tactics are being used now, but they won't always work. One of the oldest and most damaging issues for the EU's development and strengthening is the consensus principle. Overcoming it is key to the Union's future.
One option Brussels may eventually consider is stripping Hungary of its voting rights. Estonia has already openly backed this move. Article 7 of the Lisbon Treaty, the EU's de facto constitution, allows for such a measure. However, it would require unanimous support from all other EU member states. Given Slovakia's current stance and Brussels' reluctance to openly fracture European unity, political analysts believe this scenario is unlikely in the near future. Reported by Valeria Nekipelova, UATV News.
It was Henry Keane in News Pulse. Goodbye and see you the next beat.